Let's talk about summer reading. Let's get into the book nook. Let's get into the story time corner. Let's talk about some stuff I am not going to include in other episodes, but I don't want to ignore. Or some stuff I might have included in previous episodes if I had acted faster or found these books sooner. But then again, maybe they really weren't all that necessary. And that's just one of the hazards of doing so much research and grasping around for so many storylines across so many timelines and so many books and magazines and library endeavors and begging friends to borrow some of their collections. You start researching one new topic and find there are elements that would have supported a previous topic you've already covered. So I'm putting them in here instead. And I know you don't mind. I know you're just happy to have something to try to fall asleep to, maybe. Or alternately, something to keep you awake on a long drive. And I thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing me, choo-choo, to help you do either of those things. So who is going to be first? Let's see. These two books together. In the first case, I'm going to talk about Janice Joplin and Altamont. Now, Joel Selvin has a great book about Altamont, the Rolling Stones, the Hells Angels, and the inside story of rock's darkest day. And this episode today, I'm going to read just straight from the pages of various interviews because it's fun and it's worth hearing things in the author's words or in the direct words of the interviewee. So some of these are historical books. Some of these are just collections of old interviews put together into books based around one particular journalist or one particular magazine. In the case of Rolling Stone, who, of course, I will dunk on any chance I get. But like I said in the AC/DC episode that I just published, sometimes I got to give them their due. Not too often, though. But I'm happy to do it when the time is right. That'll come into the conversation later because we're going to go from bad example to good example. But this isn't that. This is Joel Selvin's book, Altamont. And I want to jump straight to page 99. Now, this whole book is just a chronicle of the planning and execution and aftermath of the Altamont concert in Northern California in 1969, step by daily step, practically. It all starts with the manager of the Grateful Dead going to England to meet up with the Rolling Stones, who had a pretty disastrous experience with an outdoor show at Hyde Park, and wanted to sort of do more and cash in on the outdoor music festival craze going on in America, but not as sloppily as what they just experienced in England. So they were really taking this guy's words to heart when he proposed the idea of Altamont to them, because the Grateful Dead were known for doing a lot of outdoor festivals and organizing it with their own people. And, let's jump to the end of the U.S., towards the end of the U.S. tour that's leading up to the Altamont show. They're doing press in New York because they're playing Madison Square Garden. And Janice Joplin's going to jump into the scene here in about a page or so. So let me back up to, in New York, the morning of Friday, November 28th, the Rolling Stones hosted a press conference high above Rockefeller Center in the Rainbow Room, with an open bar and every itinerant music journalist in town guzzling the free drinks as fast as they could. The place was a Manhattan zoo, untamed enough to make the raucous Los Angeles press confab look like a tea party. As soon as the Stones arrayed themselves behind the tangle of microphones, the mob pressed forward and started shouting questions. Cutler tried to bring them to order. Behind the Stones, a dozen beefy torpedoes in dark glasses stood along the wall, scanning the room impassively. John James, back on his home turf, had delivered this cadre of tough guys who followed the Stones everywhere as soon as they hit New York. Wearing a white tailored sport coat and peach-colored ruffled shirt open at the neck, Jagger engaged in inane banter with the press corps. "How do you like mob scenes like this, Mick?" with a vaguely haughty air of bemusement. A reporter spoke up. "You sang you couldn't get no satisfaction," she said. "Are you any more satisfied now?" "How do you mean, sexually or other?" said Jagger, cracking a smile. "Sexually satisfied. Financially, no. Philosophically, trying." The next reporter, less than 3 minutes into the event, dropped the headline question. "I read in the paper that you were planning to do a free concert in San Francisco." "Ah," interjected Jagger, ready to make his announcement. "Yes, we are doing a free concert in San Francisco on December, Ronnie Schneider behind him muttered, Six, and the location is not Golden Gate Park, but somewhere adjacent, which is a bit larger, which I won't know until 7:30 this evening. But it's definitely on, and it's on all day December the 6th. Schneider and James had only that morning told Jagger about losing Golden Gate Park. They also told him they were looking into alternative sites, although none had yet come to light. It would take 5 more days to find another location. "Why don't you do a free concert in New York?" shouted one reporter over the din. "Because New York is too cold," said Jagger. "We're going to do it outside, man. And San Francisco is really into that sort of thing." Press conference degenerated from there. The news had been broken. The announcement had been made. The game was afoot. And now, of course, the show must go on, even if Jagger didn't know where it was going to be. Al Maisels showed up late and missed any mention of a free concert in San Francisco. That night at the Garden, and after another sensational show at the matinee, Jimi Hendrix visited backstage before the evening concert. He sat quietly, almost shyly, next to Mick Taylor, who handed him his guitar. Hendrix smiled apologetically. Taylor was a right-handed guitarist, and for Hendrix to play his guitar, the left-hander would have to restring Taylor's entire instrument. Still, Hendrix couldn't help riffing up and down the fretboard, bending everyone's head with what he was playing. A drunken Janice Joplin stood around grinning. When it came time for Cutler to clear the room before the show, Joplin resisted. "Hey, don't you know who I am, man?" she asked Cutler. Cutler, wise in the ways of backstage politics, knew better than to get heavy with the inebriated diva. "Janice, how would you like a line of cocaine?" he asked. She brightened right up and told him to break it out. "Not here," said Cutler. "Come with me." He took Joplin down the hall to a room guarded by one of James's thugs, where Goldfinger sat behind a table with a bag in front of him. "Ken, you old bastard!" shouted Joplin, jumping to hug him. "What are you doing here?" Goldfinger helped the wobbly Joplin to the side of the stage to watch the show. She was celebrating having sung a number with Ike and Tina Turner before the Stones set and was feeling no pain. If Goldfinger hadn't found her a chair, she would have fallen down. Cutler, swept up in the New York fervor, abandoned his customary terse introductions for the band on stage. "Everything seems to be ready," he said to the crowd. "Are you ready? We're sorry for the delay. Is everybody ready for the next band?" Cheers. "Are you ready, New York? Ready for the biggest band to visit New York in a long time? They've done the West Coast. They've done all sorts of other places in America. Now they're in New York. Let's be cool. Have a fantastic time. Now let's really hear it. Let's welcome the greatest rock band in the world, the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones!" For the 3rd time in 2 days, the band simply destroyed the hall. New York had fallen. The Rolling Stones were masters of their universe. America had surrendered. The Stones had achieved total domination. Bigger than the Beatles, these had been unimaginable heights for these men. And they did it with 5 guys on borrowed gear and the music. Jagger was in a supremely confident mood on stage. "I think I've busted a button on me trousers," he said. "I hope they don't fall down." "You don't want me trousers to fall down, do you?" At the end of the show, I know that's a terrible Mick Jagger impression. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it very well. It's a free show. What do you want? At the end of the show, Jagger threw the whole basket of roses into the audience, not just handfuls, and petals rained down on the crowd. The Maisels followed the Stones to Boston the next night, Saturday, November 29. As the party left Logan Airport, a throng of reporters and television cameramen were waiting on the sidewalk. News of the free concert in California spread quickly. One reporter thrust a microphone in Jagger's face. "Mick, will this be a free concert?" he asked. "Ask the promoter." Not a professional Mick Jagger impersonator. You guys get off my back. The next day, the band left the plaza in New York late for the Marine Air Terminal to board a chartered jet to the last date of the tour, Sunday, November 30th at Palm Beach Pop Festival in Florida. Pilot informed them they had lost their place in line and departure would be delayed. The hours ticked past. A snow flurry came and went. Air Force One ferrying Richard Nixon held them up. They continued to wait on the tarmac. The band, due to close the climactic Sunday show at midnight, finally left the ground at 10 o'clock after changing planes 8 hours late. The Stones have been monitoring the situation at the 3-day festival. Inflamed by reports of open drug use and sex at Woodstock, Florida law enforcement came down hard on the event. The sheriff positioned 150 deputies around the speedway where the festival was being held. They arrested more than 150. The governor of Florida felt compelled to visit the site and praise the police. More than 40,000 hardy souls braved the event, which also featured stars of Woodstock such as Janice Joplin, Sly and the Family Stone, Jefferson Airplane, and Iron Butterfly. A chilling rain dropped temperatures below 40 degrees. With the festival producers' approval, the audience tore down the wooden bleachers and burned them for warmth. At 4 in the freezing morning, when the Stones finally arrived, 4 in the morning, only a fraction of the audience remained. Cutler asked them to wake up. The Stones finished their set, and the tour came to an end as a thin red crack opened up along the horizon. An hour later, an LSD-crazed kid from the concert ran screaming into the highway and was killed by a dump truck. Don't you feel like that painted a picture? Like you could imagine what was going on there? My chair's squeaky. I didn't sit down in the non-squeaky chair this time that I usually do. I usually do that for you people. I usually sit down in the non-noisy chair so the mic doesn't pick it up. So you don't hear that stuff. But today I am being selfish. I am doing little work, very little work. I am reading other people's words instead of putting things into my own. I want to talk about the opposite of that experience with Janis. Let's do a look into Ben Fong-Torres' Not Fade Away, a backstage pass to 20 years of rock and roll. For many years when I was a young person, I would see this book on the shelves of libraries and booksellers in the music section, especially if there was a rock and roll, rock history, pop, or whatever section. I assumed this was a very important tome of very weighty writing, and because he's one of the elder statesmen of Rolling Stone, one of the fellas that was there at the beginning, one of the ones that Cameron Crowe mentioned, sort of really looking up to when we got the chance to meet him. This is written, in the Rolling Stone magazine at the time, which would be, I guess, somewhere around 67, 68, maybe a little bit later. It's not too clear. I don't see a byline here or anything. Oh, nope. I take it back. May 28th, 1970. There we go. It's titled, "Hey, Janice is Feeling Great." With the publication of Sly and the Family Stone article, I had my first cover story under my oversized leather belt. By now, in spring of 1970, I'd been at Rolling Stone for almost a year. This is the introduction by the author. This is not how the article starts. It's not that self-serving. Let's see. I'd written about 60 articles, most of them short and published without a byline. Since we were cranking out 4 or 5 pieces each issue, it didn't look right to have the same names popping up on every page, so we often went without. One such story came about after I received a phone call from Janice Joplin one night in April. It was around midnight, and I was in the basement offices of a Chinatown newspaper. Perhaps I should explain. Having settled at Rolling Stone, I was contacted by Gordon Liu, the publisher of East West, the bilingual Chinese-American weekly. He needed to jazz up the English side of the paper and wanted a more youthful perspective on Chinatown and other social issues. I came in with X-Acto knives blazing, writing and editing articles and designing and laying out pages, working with next to no budget, charitable contributors, and artwork clipped out of other publications. I should say for the young people that yes, they're up through the 1990s and a little bit later, you still did have to edit newspapers and magazines manually by slicing bits and pieces of text out of pieces of paper and then physically maneuvering them around a page before it got, copied and printed. With a full-time job, I could only give East-West 1 or 2 long nights a week. One of those nights, the phone rang. Ken Wong, an editor and columnist, answered, then turned to me. It's Janice Joplin. It must be for you. That's pretty badass. I had called her a day or so before and hadn't really expected an answer. She and Rolling Stone had a tumultuous relationship. Here she was, a San Franciscan by way of Port Arthur, Texas, and she couldn't get a decent press from the one rock paper that should have been behind her. Instead, we'd run a review with the headline, Janice Joplin, the Judy Garland of rock. I would say that's less badass. Shame on them. She'd been reduced to tears by some of our articles, I was told. Boo, Rolling Stone. And now, having left her original band, Big Brother and the holding company, she had gotten a new group together and was ready to make an album. Despite the late hour, she tracked me down to this subterranean Chinatown office, and perhaps because of the hour, she was in a great mood, raving not only about her new band and the music they were rehearsing, but also about her new tattoo and recent vacation. So here is the article as printed, I believe, or as printed in the book. Janice Joplin has a new band together, and from all signs has gotten herself together too. In fact, man, I feel so fucking great that I thought I put a flower around my wrist. So she broke away from rehearsals with her new band at her home in Larkspur in Marin County, went across the Golden Gate Bridge, and trucked down to a tattoo parlor near the Greyhound Bus Depot downtown to get herself a permanent bracelet. It's a beautiful tattoo, according to the reports from girlfriends and Janice herself. It's a Baroque bracelet of hearts and flowers, ending with a green, red, and yellow flower that falls from the lower wrist into the hand itself. A lot of my Capricorn girlfriends have tattoos, Janice says. It's fucking beautiful. Janice actually got 2 tattoos, but she isn't saying where the other one is. Suffice it to say that it's a little heart laced near Janice's own. As for the band, the new Ensemble, replacing Main Squeeze, which was the remotely known name of the band that came after Big Brother left, has 5 members, 2 old, 3 new, some country, mostly blues. Staying on from Main Squeeze are Brad Campbell, bass, John Till, who replaced Sam Andrews on guitar. New members are Richard Bell on piano, formerly of Ronnie Hawkins' band, Kevin Pearson on organ. He worked on the Jesse Winchester LP, and Clark Pearson on drums. Janice found Pearson at Galaxy, a North Beach tit pub. They've been practicing at Janice's new home in Larkspur, and Janice reports, I'm super gassed. They're fucking professionals, which is not to say, she emphasizes, that her previous backups were shitty. Without the brass section she had with Snooky Flowers and Main Squeeze, Janice is moving, she said, toward a country blues sound. I'm very hesitant to use country as a label, she said. It's more like pretty down blues, more down than R&B, with a little slide guitar. And we've got loud, electric, funky country blues. The last time, Miss Joplin said, it was really quick getting a band together. This time, we're just playing and not worrying about dates. Before settling down into her new house, Janice had spent several weeks in South America, getting her head clogged and cleared at the same time. The clogging came in Rio de Janeiro, whose police make U.S. cops look like babysitters. It's vicious, man. If you've got long hair, they can drag you off and never let you out. There's no judicial system there at all. The cops rape people, put dogs to guys' balls, and people think we've got it bad. Up the Brazilian coast, Salvador was completely different. No cops. In fact, there was nothing there and no entertainment. So it ended up for 3 nights with me and my friends going to this big whorehouse that had this 4-piece band, and I sang with them. Janice Joplin is sounding and feeling good. I've got my head back, she said. May 28, 1970, Rolling Stone. Now, is that poorly written? No, not at all. But we got more detail about the design of the flower on her wrist and like the setup of this place in Chinatown where he's working than we get about those 2 stories about her travels. Like, we got more information about the other people in the band practically than Janice herself. what the hell is the rest of the stories about the whorehouse? Holy crap, dude. Jeez balls. Ah. Who do you think we buy the magazine for? The artists. Unless you're Hunter S. Thompson, but he was the artist too. And we'll get to him. He's got one of my favorite summertime reads on lock, and I just recently revisited it and decided I would share a little bit of that with you to now be nicer to the folks at Rolling Stone. Although he was always known for having a very adversarial relationship with Rolling Stone magazine, they did help make him famous. Okay, now I'm jumping into Hell's Angels by Hunter S. Thompson for two connections of what we just talked about. One is a connection to Rolling Stone magazine. The other is the connection to Altamont. Now, Hunter did not cover Altamont in this book. I don't believe, because it came out in 1967. So I want to read from chapter 6 to help, I guess, kind of explain why the presence of the Hells Angels as security at Altamont was going to inevitably lead to a lot of terror and violence. Not that job would have been easy for any security force that wasn't much bigger than what they had to work with. And this is because I don't necessarily plan on doing an episode about Altamont per se. I don't know if there's a movie about it that I should watch and review. If you know of one, please call in right now, and I will get it on my list. Of all their habits and predilections that society finds alarming, the outlaws' disregard for the time-honored concept of an eye for an eye is the one that frightens most people. The Hells Angels try not to do anything halfway, and outcasts who deal in extremes are bound to cause trouble, whether they mean to or not. This, along with a belief in total retaliation for any offense or insult, is what makes the Angels such a problem for police and so morbidly fascinating to the general public. Their claim that they don't start trouble is probably true more often than not, but their idea of provocation is dangerously broad. And one of their main difficulties is that almost nobody else seems to understand it. Yet they have a very simple rule of thumb. In any argument, a fellow angel is always right. To disagree with a Hell's Angel is to be wrong. And to persist in being wrong is an open challenge. Despite everything psychiatrists and Freudian castrators have to say about the Angels, they are tough, mean, and potentially dangerous as packs of wild boar. The moment a fight begins, any leather fetishes or inadequacy feelings are entirely beside the point, as anyone who has ever tangled with them will sadly testify. When you get into an argument with a group of outlaw motorcyclists, your chances of emerging unmaimed depend on the number of heavy-handed allies you can muster in the time it takes to smash a beer bottle. In this league, sportsmanship is for old liberals and young fools. Many of their assault victims are people who have seen too many Western movies. They are victims of the John Wayne complex, which causes them to start swinging the moment they sense any insult. This is relatively safe in some areas of society, but in saloons frequented by the outlaw motorcyclists, it is the worst kind of folly. They're always looking for somebody to challenge them, said a San Francisco policeman. And once you're involved with them, it's all or nothing. A stranger who doesn't want anything to do with them, if one of the bums says anything to his woman, he can't take offense or he'll have to fight 4 or 5 angels, not just the one. People should understand this. One of the Frisco Angels explained it without any frills. Our motto, man, is all on one and one on all. You mess with an angel and you got 25 of them on your neck. I mean, they'll break you, but good, baby. The Outlaws take the all-on-one concept so seriously that it is written into the club charter as bylaw number 10. When an angel punches a non-angel, all other angels will participate. The outlaws never know from one moment to the next when they might have to grapple with some foe bent on humiliating the colors. Pause. Colors are the jackets, the sleeveless vests they wear, or anything, jean jackets too, that has the name of the club and the insignia of the club on it. Those are your colors. There's a great story about the initiation process and what gets done to your first and only, supposedly, set of colors. I mean, it won't be your only if you want to layer them up, I suppose, but you're supposed to wear them until they disintegrate. And they start that process of disintegration by dumping urine and feces that they've collected among all of the present angels into buckets, dumping it on your colors and stomping it into the fibers of your colors, and then putting them on you to wear and never wash. The outlaws never know from one moment to the next when they might have to grapple with some foe bent on humiliating the colors. Here is a hazy yet fairly instructive account of a clash with an ex-angel named Phil and his XKE Jaguar. For several hours prior to the incident, Phil had been drinking and arguing in a roadhouse with a half a dozen members of the Oakland chapter. Finally, they told him to leave or be stomped. Phil went outside, backed his car off about 50 yards from the row of bikes at the curb. Stopping. Your narrator is stopping to take a drink. Then plowed into them like a bulldozer, breaking the leg of one angel who tried to get his bike out of the way. This is how the Lynch report told it. On November 4, 1961, a San Francisco resident driving through the rodeo, possibly under the influence of alcohol, struck a motorcycle belonging to a Hells Angel parked outside a bar. A group of angels pursued the vehicle, pulled the driver from the car, and attempted to demolish the rather expensive vehicle. The bartender claimed he had seen nothing but a cocktail waitress in the bar furnished identification to the officers concerning some of those responsible for the assault. The next day, it was reported to officers that a member of the Hells Angels gang had threatened the life of this waitress, as well as another woman waitress. A male witness, who identified definitely 5 participants in the assault, including the president of the Vallejo Hells Angels and the Vallejo Road Rats, since absorbed by the Angels, advised officers that because of his fear of retaliation by club members, he would refuse to testify to the facts he had previously furnished. Motorcycles are knocked over by cars every day, all over the nation, but when the incident involves outlaw motorcyclists, it's something else again. Instead of settling the thing with an exchange of insurance information, or at the very worst, an argument with a few blows, the Hells Angels stomped the driver, a former member, and attempted to demolish the vehicle. I asked one of them whether the police exaggerated this aspect, and he said no. They had done the natural thing, smashed headlights, kicked in doors, broken windows, and torn various components off the engine. Another instructive clash occurred soon after the Monterey incident when the outlaws were still feeling tough. It began as an everyday act of revenge, but it didn't come off. Perhaps for this reason, the police report was unusually restrained. On September 19th, 1964, a large group of Hells Angels and Satan's slaves converged on a bar in Southgate, Los Angeles County, parking their motorcycles and cars in the street in such a fashion as to block one half of the roadway. They told officers that 3 members of the club had recently been asked to stay out of the bar and that they had come to tear it down. Upon their approach, the bar owner locked the doors and turned off the lights, and no entrance was made. But the group did demolish a cement block fence. On arrival of the police, members of the clubs were lying on the sidewalk and in the street. They were asked to leave the city, which they did reluctantly. As they left, several were heard to say that they would be back and tear down the bar. All in all, it was a pretty quiet outrage. And except for the demolition of a fence, it went into the books as a routine victory for law and order. It was also a good example of the total retaliation ethic. When you're asked to stay out of a bar, you don't just punch the owner. You come back with your army and tear the place down. Destroy the whole edifice and everything it stands for. No compromise. If a man gets wise, mash his face. If a woman snubs you, rape her. This is the thinking, if not the reality, behind the whole Hells Angels act. It is also the aspect of the story that gets to the editors of news magazines. The combined testimony of 104 police departments is proof enough that the outlaws were are unable to enforce their savage codes on any level of society but their own. And yet, the white-collar, button-down world is obviously alarmed to hear that these codes exist at all, which they do, and are also adhered to, as noted in the concluding paragraphs of the California Attorney General's report. The group seeks to exploit the so-called gangsters' code of group loyalty and threats to the persons who might appear in court against them. There have been instances of Hells Angels punishing witnesses by physical assault. In the event that the witness or victim is female, the women associates of the angels seem willing to participate in threats to discourage testimony. A practical problem seen in various cases is that both victims and witnesses generally exist in the same environment, as do the Hells Angels. While gang rapes and forced sex perversions may have occurred, the victims and witnesses frequently are not of the higher social strata and thus vulnerable to the mores of saloon society. It is believed that the only feasible approach to the solution of this problem is for investigating officers to recognize it, take all steps possible to protect witnesses both before and after trial. Not many members of saloon society will find consolation in these words. The angels and their allies bear grudges much longer than police feel it's necessary to protect witnesses. And cops have a tendency to lose interest in a prosecution witness about 5 minutes after the jury comes in with a verdict. No bartender who has caused the arrest of an angel will ever feel anything but panic at the sound of a motorcycle engine in the street and the clumping of leather boot heels coming towards his door. The angels don't willfully trace their enemies from one place to another, but they spend so much of their time in bars that they are likely to turn up thirsty almost anywhere. And once an enemy is located, the word goes out fast on the network. It takes only 2 or 3 angels and no more than 5 minutes to wreck a bar and put a man in the hospital. Chances are they won't be arrested, but even if they are, the damage is already done. An intended victim, such as the bar owner in Southgate who suffered only the loss of offense in the first attack, will always know that his place has a certain distinction. It is marked, and as long as the Hells Angels or Satan's slaves exist, there is a chance that some of them will come back to finish the job. The outlaw hierarchy is always in flux, but the spirit is no different now than in 1950, when the first Angel chapter was formed in the long shadow of the booze fighters. The root definition remains the same: a dangerous hoodlum on a big, fast motorcycle. And California has been breeding them for years. Many are independents, indistinguishable from any Hells Angel except for the lettering on their backs: No Club, or Lone Wolf, or sometimes just Fuck You. Perhaps 500 or so, definitely less than 1,000, belong to clubs like the Gypsy Jokers, Night Riders, Comancheros, Presidents, and Satan's Slaves. About 150 as of 1966 form the outlaw elite, the Hells Angels. The only consistent difference between the Hells Angels and the other outlaw clubs is that the Angels are more extreme. Most of the others are part-time outlaws, but the Angels play the role 7 days a week. They wear their colors at home, on the street, and sometimes even to work. And they ride their bikes to the neighborhood grocery for a quart of milk. An angel without colors feels naked and vulnerable, like a knight without his armor. A Sacramento cop once asked a 5'5", 130-pound angel, "What's the big attraction?" "Nobody bugs me as long as I'm flying the colors," he replied. The dividing line between outlaws and the square majority is subject to change at any moment, and many respectable clubs have queered their image overnight. All it takes is a noisy fracas, police report, and a little publicity, and suddenly they're outlaws. In most cases, this leads to the breakup of the club, with a majority of the members feeling hurt and scandalized that such a thing could have happened. But those few responsible for the trouble will no longer be welcome in respectable circles. Technically, they become independents. But that term is a misnomer, because any rider who applies it to himself is already an outlaw anyway. All he lacks is a club to join, and sooner or later he will find one. The motorcycle fraternity is very tight on both sides of the law, and the most extreme viewpoints are represented by the American Motorcycle Association and the Hells Angels. There is no status in the middle, and people who are serious enough about motorcycles to join an AMA club will not take rejection lightly. Like converts to communism or Catholicism, Hells Angels who were once AMA members take their outlaw role more seriously than the others. The Angels are too personally disorganized to have any clear perspective on the world, but they admire intelligence, and some of their leaders are surprisingly articulate. Chapter presidents have no set term in office, and a strong one, like Barger, will remain unchallenged until he goes to jail, gets killed, or finds his own reasons for hanging up the colors. The outlaws are very respectful of power, even if they have to create their own image of it. Despite the anarchic possibilities of the machines they ride and worship, they insist that their main concern in life is to be a righteous angel, which requires a loud obedience to the party line. They are intensely aware of belonging, of being able to depend on each other. Because of this, they look down on independents, who usually feel so wretched once they've adopted the outlaw frame of reference that they will do almost anything to get into a club. I don't know why, said an ex-angel, but you almost have to join a club. If you don't, you'll never be accepted anywhere. If you don't wear any colors, you're sort of in between, and you're nothing. This desperate sense of unity is crucial to the outlaw mystique. If the Hells Angels are outcasts from society, as they freely admit, then it is all the more necessary that they defend each other from attack by the others. Mean squares, enemy gangs, or armed agents of the main cop. When somebody punches a lone angel, every one of them feels threatened. They are so wrapped up in their own image that they can't conceive of anybody challenging the colors without being fully prepared to take on the whole army. For many are called, but few are chosen. St. Matthew. Since the revelations of the Lynch Report, the Angels have rejected so many membership bids that one of them said it was like a plague of locusts. The majority of would-be angels are independents who suddenly feel the need for fellowship and status. But in one case, the Angels deigned to absorb a whole club. The Question Marks from Hayward, which became the Hayward chapter of the Hells Angels. Other charter applications came as far away as Indiana, Pennsylvania, New York, Michigan, and even Quebec. And when the charters were not forthcoming, a few cycle clubs in the East simply created their own insignia and began calling themselves Hells Angels. Footnote: a club called the Detroit Renegades decided to hang on to their identity and go the Angels one better. In January 1966, 44 of them were arrested when a police raid on their storefront clubhouse netted 18 pistols. The raid was prompted by neighbors' complaints that the Renegades' presence cast a pall of fear on the neighborhood. They came out from a clear blue sky, said the tenant in a nearby building, and they drank down there. When they get too much, the women in the neighborhood are scared. Police said most of the outlaws were factory workers and filling station attendants, ranging in age from 18 to 35. Despite the elegance of the renegade uniform, black leather jackets, and satin shirts, a neighbor described them as crummy-looking people. Later in 1966, an unofficial Hells Angels chapter appeared in Detroit. After several well-publicized mass arrests, the leaders appealed to Barger for a national charter, which was still pending in autumn when this book went to press. As of 1966, the Hells Angels proper were still confined to California, but if the general response to their publicity is any indicator, they are going to have to expand, whether they want to or not. The name isn't copyrighted, but even if it were, the threat of a lawsuit wouldn't be much of a deterrent to any gang of writers who wanted to appropriate it. The Angels' only hope for controlling their image lies in selective expansion, chartering only the biggest and meanest clubs who apply, but only on the condition that they terrorize anybody else in their area who tries to use the name. The Angels won't have any trouble exporting their name to the East, but the day-to-day realities of being an outlaw motorcyclist in California are not easily transplantable. Bikes are a sunshine thing. They are dangerous and uncomfortable in rain and snow. A gang of riders in New York, Chicago, or Boston could only operate in the far-ranging Hells Angels style for a few months out of the year, while in California, the outlaws can move around, except in the mountains, anytime they get the urge. This factor is reflected in the nationwide motorcycle sales. In 1964, New York registered 23,000 bikes, while California had 203,420, a roughly 9-to-1 ratio. On the other hand, there were more than twice as many motorcycles in New York in 1964 than there were in 1961, when only 10,000 were registered. So, at the end of that reading, there the Angels were poised for explosive amounts of growth, more exposure in the national media, not just the coastal media in California. Numbers are growing. They're getting a lot more attention. They're trying to find a way to profit off of it. It's not a long read, that book, Hell's Angels, and I highly recommend it. Even if you think Hunter S. Thompson is just for geeks that like worship people that do too many drugs and should have grown out of that in college, I highly recommend Hell's Angels because it's a lot more straight journalism than what he would evolve into later. It's still all told from his point of view, but as you could hear from that reading, it's very well, annotated, and it's not just him running around acting wacky in public. I was going to also read something out of a book that has a really good breakdown of Jerry Lee Lewis's life, since I missed out on having that source when I did the last Jerry Lee Lewis episode, but I think I'll just stay with the 60s motif right now, the late 60s motif, and read from some comments from Pete Townshend. Now, I'm reading this out of Rolling Stone 20th anniversary edition, released in December 1987, issue 512 of Rolling Stone. That's their 20th anniversary. They decided to look back and on their past and interview important folks in the present day. So to let you know where Rolling Stone thinks rock and roll is at in 87, the interviews are with Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, George Harrison, Keith Richards, Stevie Wonder, Pete Townshend, Bono, Sting, Tom Wolfe, Hunter S. Thompson, Edward Kennedy, Walter Cronkite, Jack Nicholson, and more. This is definitely the era of like Bono and Sting for sure, but they have a really cool interview with Pete Townshend that focuses on the late 60s and his attitude on it looking back. So I'll start reading there at the top of this one. This has been a year in which the craze for rock's past, the Summer of Love, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, has eclipsed interest in its present. How do you feel about this sudden yearning for the good old days? If anything exemplifies 60s pop, particularly 67 through 69, it was a strong connection with the roots of spiritual theosophy and the language that rang with it. The idea that pop music was about spiritual uplift, these are Pete's words, by the way. Human potential, solidarity, unification. And that's very difficult to recreate. When you look at the Flower Power era, you look back at the Flower Power era, it all looks daft. I feel particularly cynical because I thought it was daft at the time. I didn't like Haight-Ashbury. I didn't like Abby Hoffman. I didn't like Timothy Leary, and I didn't like Woodstock. I've been fighting all my life to make people realize that the superficial qualities of pop and rock are not the parameters through which you should judge the product of that generation. The music was less important than the musicians. The musicians were less important than the audience. The audience was less important than the infrastructure that was created around a generation. And ultimately, the activists were less important than the overall underlying mood of reaction that music was becoming a symbol for. The music wasn't responsible for it. What's wrong with looking at something like Sgt. Pepper as a symbol for such a time is that it avoids confronting the real truth, that Sgt. Pepper was possible as a product at the time only because people were so inordinately open-minded, so conscious of being in pursuit of innocence, that they were willing to take a chance with anybody. They would back any horse except the horse of violence. They were conscious of the fact that naivete and innocence had a purpose. The interviewer says, compared with the upheavals in popular music between the rise of Elvis Presley in the mid-50s and the breakup of the Beatles in 1970, rock seems to be changing and evolving at a much slower pace now. How does that bode for the music's future? And Pete says, I don't expect change necessarily. I recently listened to a new record by a band that I hold in high regard. I won't say who they are, and found myself thinking, hey, I don't think this sounds any different from what they've done in the past, or from what the Liverpool bands were doing in 1980. Then I checked myself. Hold on a minute. You shouldn't be expecting Beatles-esque innovation from everybody. The game everybody's playing at the moment. Prince has just made his White Album. What comes next? Abbey Road, then obscurity? If you go back to the early days, to the period between Presley and Sgt. Pepper, where songwriting and recording techniques, integrating political ideas into pop, all came together, that what you're looking at is something that wasn't necessarily new. The course that had already been struck in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. What was important about pop then was that it established that change in itself leads you to a new starting point. So change in itself leads you to a new starting point. It might have been incredibly fast, but I think it was incredibly slow. It took from Elvis to Sgt. Pepper a good 10 years to convince not just bloody Wilfrid Mellers, a British musicologist, that pop music was worthy of consideration, but the public. This music grows at an organic rate, a rate that is governed by the way of broadcasting is structured, the way marketing is structured, but most of all, it grows at the rate the public wants it to grow. And if they want Who clones and Led Zeppelin clones, then they'll get them. In recent years, you've been very outspoken about how much The Who accomplished in terms of changing the world and how much being in the band drained you physically and spiritually. How do you feel about the reverence with which you and The Who are still treated? I've been looking at The Who's career and realizing that while The Who were the most important thing in my life for 20-odd years, they were not the most important thing in the world. They were not the most important thing in rock and roll, and they were not the most important band in any of the critical cycles. There was always someone working on a par with The Who. If I was to choose completely objectively who was a better writer, Pete Townshend or Ray Davies, I would pick Ray. I know that now. I've always seen him as a compatriot and a contemporary. But I also know that he was, and still is, a better writer. And what Ray and I both have to live with is that the Beatles and Stones were 50 times bigger than the Kinks or The Who would ever be, and to be happy with that. Part of the realism that's required is a dismantling of the way rock sadly adopted the Hollywood star system and everything that was bad about it. We were convinced we wouldn't do that. And we have, even to that extent, today, Springsteen, who must be the last person on earth who wanted to be a superstar, has become one. And the more he tries not to be, the more Garbo-esque he's going to become. I'm glad I got out of that system. The realism I'm coming to grips with now is that I'm a nobody, like anybody else. I'm only as good as my next trick. Throughout your career, you have been one of rock's most prominent theoreticians, analyzing its cultural importance and emotional impact in your songs, interviews, and your essays. Did you feel a responsibility to articulate your feelings and views to your audience? To some extent. It used to hurt when Keith Richards would say, "Pete, you think too much. Get down and play your guitar." But I always did want to be like a social worker. I wanted my popularity to be real popularity. I wanted the real me to be appreciated, not the performing me. I didn't particularly want to be loved for the way I played guitar. The way I played guitar was part of my angry side, my rebellious side. What my audience loved me for most was something that was only a small part of me. One of the great ironies of Tommy was that because of the Woodstock movie, the See Me, Feel Me chorus in the finale became a real anthem for the hippie dream, a theme for the gathering of the tribes. Yet the whole point of Tommy was that utopia was not around the corner, that this explosion of positive youth energy was already being co-opted and corrupted, in this case by a deaf, dumb, and blind guru. I was thinking about this last night, laughs. Why is it that rock songwriters are not allowed to be ironic? Why is it that satire can only be comedic? Why can't rock satire be real satire, real irony? I know there's a lot of people who heard Tommy, listened to certain tracks, and completely misread them. What people went for in Tommy was the celebration, not the denouement. The sad thing is I continue to live with the finale, not the bit in the middle. What was important at the time, and continues to be important, is that the human individual accepts the fact that he or she is capable of being spiritually swayed. And in order to make the best of that, they really have to listen to what's being said. It's no point being carried away by the uplift. I suppose the mistake I made in Tommy was, instead of having the guts to take what Meher Baba said, which was, "Don't worry, be happy, leave the results to God," and repeating that to people, I decided that people weren't capable of hearing that directly. They've got to have it served in this entertainment package, and I gave them Tommy instead, in which some of Meher Baba's wonderfully explicit truths were presented to them half-baked in lyric form and diluted as a result. In fact, if there was any warning in Tommy, it was, don't make any more records like that. Probably the most lasting and anthemic song you've ever written was My Generation. How do you look back at that song now? My Generation was very much about trying to find a place in society. I was very, very lost. The band was young then. It was believed that its career would be incredibly brief. The privilege that I had at the time was to be plucked out of bedsitter land and put in a flat in the middle of Belgravia with two tape machines. It was private, and I could look out at these people who seemed to me to be from another planet. I remember one of the things I bought when The Who first became successful was a 1963 Lincoln Continental. I was driving with the top down through London, and a woman in a car going the other direction looked at me. She was wearing a string of pearls, blonde hair, very beautiful, about 35. She kind of looked at me as if admiring my car. Then her lip curled and she said, "Driving Mummy's car, are we?" That one incident, among a series of other key incidents, made me hate those people. I really started to respond to that. All right, you motherfuckers, I'm going to have you. I'm going to be bigger and richer, and I'm going to move into your neighborhood, and I'm going to buy that house next to you, Lord so-and-so. And I've done it, and I'm afraid I've done it out of a great sickness. I talk to people I really do respect from that way of life now, and I say to them, do you realize why it is I'm so driven to operate within the establishment? It's vengeance. Hope I die before I get old is something I still have to live with, but not for the reason many people think. I have to be very, very vigilant not to become one of the people I despised. Was Won't Get Fooled Again a song of rebellious independence or a song of disillusionment? It's the dumbest song I've ever written. How dumb was it? It was dumb to deny the political role of the individual, the political responsibility of the individual. Burning your draft card is a political act. Throwing your vote away is an apolitical act. And Won't Get Fooled Again was an apolitical song. Luckily, most people didn't listen to the verses. There's nothing in the street looks any different to me, and the slogans are all replaced by the by. They just listened to the catch. It was an irresponsible song. It was quite clear during that period that rock musicians had the ear of the people, and people who were saying to me then, Pete, you've got to use The Who. You've got to get this message across. It was like Abby Hoffman said on the stage of Woodstock that John Sinclair was in jail for one lousy joint, and I kicked him off the stage. I deeply regret that. If I was given the opportunity again, I would stop the show. Because I don't think rock and roll is that important. Then I did. The show had to go on. What made me stop thinking the show had to go on was obviously Cincinnati. It was a terrible lesson I had to learn. For a long time, I couldn't live with that. It was directly responsible for me literally, emotionally falling apart. Side note, fans were trampled at a Cincinnati show by The Who. But it was a valuable lesson for me today, looking back on the political relevance or irrelevance of a song like Won't Get Fooled Again. And I greatly regret that it's one of the most powerful songs I've ever written. The Labor Party asked me if they could use it in their election campaign, and I said, yeah, but please let me rewrite the verses. Pausing for a second, I'm going to skip a few paragraphs and flip past a full-page ad for the movie Cry Freedom, the true story of the friendship that shook South Africa and awakened the world, from the Academy Award-winning director of Gandhi, starring Kevin Kline, Penelope Wilton, and Denzel Washington. Richard Attenborough's Cry Freedom opens November 6th in select cities and November 20th nationwide. Never heard of it. Sure it was good. Let's see. Another question. As the man who wrote Hope I Die Before I Get Old, how did you feel about being dismissed by British punks in the late 70s as a boring old fart? What's terrible is when people like Billy Idol and the Sex Pistols say they were only acting at the time. I find it incomprehensible. Oh, well, we really didn't mean it when we spit all over you down at the Roxy. We didn't hate you. We just were doing it. You know, what teenagers are like. No, I don't know what teenagers are like because when I smashed guitars, I fucking well meant it. Did punk energize you as a writer, a rocker? Energize is the wrong word. It freed me. It allowed me to be myself. It dignified me in a way to be cast to one side. I felt very uneasy with the way the Who were inevitably on the road to mega stardom. I believed that the punk movement would free me from that. It did. It freed me from it, that it was all crap, and that the bottom line was we were all flesh and blood, but the Who as a band didn't believe it. I ultimately had to stop using the band as a vehicle for my songwriting. In a way, I've got the punk explosion to thank for making that decision. Commercially, leaving the Who was the dumbest thing I've done in my life, but artistically, it was undeniably the most logical thing for me to do. It was the most important thing I've ever done for me, to allow me to have a new beginning, to actually grow. How do you feel about the way U2 has been held up, especially in America, as inheritors of the Who's tradition of spiritually and socially committed rock and roll? I feel for them just the way I felt afraid for Bruce Springsteen. I wanted to tell him, Bruce, be careful. They'll destroy you. They're not really listening to you. And that's the thing I worry about U2. I want them to be enormous. I want people to have them. As far as musical evolution, they have a great future before them. The Edge is a giant, rooted and remaining as they do in Ireland. It will produce their most apocalyptic vision. They can bring a unique view to the world, but they better watch out. I have told Bono a couple of times, you can't think you can control the way people respond to you. People are falling in love with you too, and you can't control love. Love doesn't listen to Bono's intelligence or to what Bono has discovered in John Lee Hooker or in reading the French Impressionist poets. They look at the band and they love the fact that they're a great band. All right. There's more to the interview, but I think I'm going to leave it at that. This is about an hour now, and, these episodes usually are supposed to be a breather from the big, long ones. I'm also going to see if I can take the next 2.5 minutes and sneak this up as an upload before everything ticks over and my account with Libsyn resets my amount of storage for the month. That's all the time I have to figure that out. So it either will work or it won't. Did you like that? Like that little flub there? Me trying to figure out stuff? Does that improve your listening experience? That was recorded many months ago. And that's the end of that riff being figured out. Someday it'll be a song, I hope. For now, it's for you. No, you know what? It's too late. I'm not going to make the deadline, so forget it. I'm going to keep going with this Rolling Stone magazine 20th anniversary because there's some really good letters that they printed from 1971 that I thought, after I read this back in May, I'm like, I'm going to save this. I'm going to save some of these for a podcast eventually. So let's just do that. I have news of the utmost import. My studies from the past 3 years employing an IBM 059 computer have been carefully carried out and point to only one appalling conclusion. We are about to run out of new songs. The total number of available notes, and I use this term in its broadest sense, will yield only a set number of possible melodies. If my calculations are correct, we will have reached that fateful number within the next 2 years. Gary Barclay, Vancouver, British Columbia. Do with that what you will. Next letter. I just thought you might like to know that the strange words John Lennon sings in Across the Universe on the Let It Be album are Love is Good Hash backward. G. Grover III, Jacksonville, Florida. Dear G. Grover III of Jacksonville, Florida, don't be silly. Love, John and Yoko, New York City. In the April 17th Newsweek, Stuart Alsop referred to Rolling Stone as the organ of the counterculture. I think it is your duty to inform your readers as to exactly which organ you are. Barry Cooper, Miami Beach, Florida. For ordinary purposes, we are about a Hammond A200 editor. Why are Hunter Thompson and Raoul Duke never seen together? Lois Lane, San Francisco, California. Dear Mr. Duke, because of you, we find ourselves incapable of writing straight news stories. We have become hopelessly addicted to ether. We now eat, sleep, and think gonzo. Even our news editor has degenerated into a babbling fool who thinks that he is you. Because of you, we are flunking journalism. The Connorsville High School Clarion, Connorsville, Indiana. 1973. For your information, Maybeck High School English class has selected the lyrics, I got a freaky old lady named a cocaine Katie who embroiders on my jeans as the most sociologically significant rock words. They triumphed over smoking cigarettes and watching Captain Kangaroo. You flew your Learjet up to Nova Scotia to see the total eclipse of the sun, and only 13 and she knows how to nasty. Paul August, teacher, Oakland, California. All right, I think that's everything I have as far as gas in the tank right now before I get into materials that are not as period specific as what we've been talking about. So I guess I'll say these are the kind of episodes that might pop up more often than not when it comes to all the different resources I'm collecting information from and all the things that I don't have that don't fit in a full hour's worth or half hour or hour and a half that I usually end up doing or don't have a movie to connect to, I guess. And I know episodes like this might feel disjointed or fragmented or without clear direction, but you'd be a fool to think so. That's right. It's all part of my grandly orchestrated plan. I do go off on speculative tangents sometimes, but listen, motherfuckers, you got to deal with that now and then because most podcasts that you listen to start with 2 or 3 goons discussing their weekend or what they did with each other, something that they read on Twitter or the wacky hijinks of some intern or other that has nothing to do with the subject matter you subscribe to their podcast or their channel for, right? Right. I get to do this now and then, so I don't totally waste all my time in research with nothing to show for it. No one's paying for this. I'm not getting a master's degree at this time. God damn it. Hey, look up the song People Who Have Died by the Jim Carroll Band if you've never heard it. Read the lyrics to it. Listen to it 3 times in a row. And then go maybe listen to any 2 songs from Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska. But especially Nebraska and Atlantic City. And then do other things that I say in future episodes because I said so. I got turned down for sponsorship by a peanut butter flavored whiskey company, California, recently. That's where we're at, folks. That's my value. What else was I going to mention before I go? Don't ever watch Hamburger the Motion Picture. Maybe check out Bastards of Young, the song by The Replacements, if you've never heard it before. And if you're the kind of person that hears me say that and goes, for crying out loud, everyone's heard The Replacements. Shut up, they haven't. You're old or you're an aspiring rock journalist that has no audience now. Oh, if you need some amazing stories about early country music, I can't recommend Cocaine and Rhinestones podcast enough. If you don't know by now, go find it. Also, Trash Theory YouTube channel for a lot of great music history from Europe and England, especially the 80s goth period and post-punk and new wave period. Tons of good stories, very well delivered and edited, and very helpful for eventually what might be coming from me, because I've been planning to do episodes about new wave and post-punk for about a year now. Thank you for being here once again. Thank you for listening wherever you are. I hope you're well. I hope you love your life. And if you don't, I hope someone tricks you into loving something for a little while and distracts you from the things that you don't love currently. You can't be, expected to love all the things all the time or do all the things every day for everybody else. But you can be distracted from wanting to kill yourself or somebody else for short periods of time. Rock and roll is the greatest thing I've ever found and ever experienced, and I love it so much, and I'm glad we have it, and I'm glad we have you. Stay true to everything you can.